It can be attained in the United States, but it is significantly more difficult. Okay, because I said before, every recession it gets worse and worse and worse for most people. Not everybody, maybe you're watching this, you haven't been affected, but overall, every recession, which is typically has been now every 10 years, every 10 to 12 years, it gets worse and worse and worse economically for most Americans. They have less disposable income. They have more credit card debt. I know I had to use their credit cards because their full-time job could not pay for all of their expenses. I've seen that more than once, and where somebody makes 12 or $15 an hour, 12 or $14 an hour, and they still have to use their credit card to pay for 10 to 15% of the necessary expenses because that job doesn't cover. It could be maybe the state income tax is high or whatever it is, but no one should have to use a credit card because their job doesn't pay enough. To me, yeah, that's mind-boggling.
From the Washington Post, headline: Workers are picking up extra jobs just to pay for gas and food. Subheadline: Prices are rising faster than wages, and more Americans than ever are working two full-time jobs simultaneously. I will not read the entire article, but I will include a link in the description for you to read at your convenience. At the fourth paragraph, a tight labor market has pushed wages up across the board, but not enough to keep pace with inflation, which hits a 40-year high in June. That's forcing workers to seek second jobs and increase their hours to pay for their normal expenses. The percentage of employed people working multiple jobs in the U.S. has steadily increased since March of 2020, from 4% in April 2020 to 4.8% in June of 2022, according to data from the St. Louis Federal Reserve. While people taking on multiple jobs is typically a sign of a healthy job market where workers have more job opportunities available, it's also a sign of increasing financial strain on Americans' pocketbooks. Workers are increasingly taking on a second full-time job and clocking more than 70 hours a week to make ends meet. Although fewer people overall have multiple jobs now than before the pandemic, more workers now hold two full-time jobs, defined as more than 35 hours a week per job, than any point since the Bureau of Labor Statistics began collecting this data in 1994. 426,000 Americans held two full-time jobs in June, compared to 308,000 in February 2020. The costs of essentials like gas, food, and rent have especially skyrocketed as inflation rose, according to BLS reports. That has disproportionately hurt low-wage workers who typically suffer most from high inflation because they devote a higher share of their income to those expenses, which are harder to cut back on. Higher earning white-collar workers can cut back on fuel costs by finding remote jobs that allow them to avoid commuting or move to cheaper cities. A June Quinnipiac poll found that 52% of Americans cut back significantly on how much they drove because of the rise in gas prices. But most workers don't have that option, and low-wage workers, especially in the hospitality and service industries, are more likely to be required to show up in person to do their jobs and spend heavily in gas. Even in 2021, when the pandemic was forcing more closures than it is now, only 13% of private sector workers in the U.S. did their jobs from home all of the time, and 78% rarely or never worked from home, according to a BLS survey.
However, the new American dream can be attained if you look beyond your borders. Maybe this is not something you're ready to do right now. That's fine. But maybe this is something you can start considering to do in a year, possibly in 2 years. Okay. This is the reason why I have chosen to live here in Mexico. As a foreigner in most countries, you're not going to have any problems. Okay. Only thing you're going to have to do if you live in a Spanish speaking country, you're going to have to speak Spanish. Unless you want to live in a few areas and where you don't have to speak any Spanish, you can speak all English, but that's going to be a bit more expensive. Places like Cancun, places like La Paz, Los Cabos, San Miguel de Allende. Those are places here in Mexico where, yeah, if you don't want to speak no Spanish, no problem, but you're going to pay more. It will still probably be less than what you'll pay in the US, but you're still going to pay more. I'm all out of coffee, and that's a big problem because that's the fuel that gives me the energy to make you these helpful videos. Visit the link below and consider buying me a coffee, 2 coffees, or whatever monetary amount you choose. I hope to have your support and thank you in advance for your generosity.